Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for this Spring Talk Special Earth Day panel, Creativity and Circularity, Designing a More Sustainable Future. My name is Sally-Ann Lim, I'm Insights Director at Spring Studios, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. Sustainability has been rising to the top of the agenda for several years now, and the effects of COVID-19 have only served to further underscore its importance. 65% of global consumers now say that they will be more mindful about the impact of their consumption moving forwards. As our understanding of sustainability expands and evolves, the subject of the circular economy and its potential to unlock a more sustainable future is starting to come to the fore. Though it's an appealing concept in principle, it's yet to truly permeate the mainstream consumer conscience and can often feel quite earnest or intangible. Enter a new generation of visionary designers who are using their creativity to challenge the status quo, exploring circularity in a way that is engaging, desirable, commercially viable, and really captures consumers' imaginations. On our panel today, we have the pleasure of speaking with three such individuals: Aligheri's Rosh Matani, Cecile Banson, and Kevin Germanier. Roche launched her brand single-handedly and without investment in 2014. 7 years on, and Aligheri is a global business with 25 employees, stocked in 105 stores worldwide. Last year, Roche was awarded the prestigious Queen Elizabeth II Award for British Design, making her the first jewellery designer to receive the accolade. The award recognises exceptional talent and originality, as well as strong community values and sustainable practices. Strong, feminine, and refined, Cecile Banson's designs reflect a big customer base that prizes effortless comfort. Craftsmanship is key, and she works closely with manufacturers to create sustainable textiles. Cecile is passionate about exploring ethical ways of working, such as upcycling, and is moving towards a low-waste business model. And last, but by no means least, Kevin Germanier's eponymous label is synonymous with sustainable glamour. Not only is everything upcycled, but his business is purposefully designed to reduce waste and machinery. It's also a family affair. Kevin's grandmother, aged 82, is head of knitwear in order to protect savoir-faire from generation to generation. So just before we dive into the discussion, I should also briefly mention that if you do have any questions that you'd like to put to our panelists, you can use the chat function in the webinar, and we'll try and keep around 5 to 10 minutes at the end for your questions. So welcome panelists. Can I just check that you're all unmuted?
Hi.
Perfect. Cecile, you might still be on mute. The joys of Zoom.
There we go.
We've got your first hurdle. So really going there with my first question. If you are consciously minded and you care about sustainability, and yet fashion is your creative outlet and indeed your livelihood, does that create a sense of conflict in you as a designer? And if so, how do you look to reconcile this tension? Rosh, maybe I can come to you first with that question.
Sure. I know exactly what you mean. The idea of, the fashion industry is sometimes, often referred to as the enemy of sustainability. And this idea that, creating new things is the opposite of being sustainable. But I think that ultimately I reconcile that with the fact that since the beginning of time, we have always dressed ourselves and adorned ourselves with objects in order to express who we are. And that's not a frivolous thing. That's kind of an expression of identity. So I think for me, it's not about, feeling guilty about it. It's about being in it and doing it in a way that is meaningful. And you've got to kind of be in it to change it, I think.
Absolutely. Kevin, what's your point of view on that?
I always say that the more limited, the more struggle I have, the more creative I feel. So that's why I never considered myself as a sustainable designer. To be honest, I started upcycle my bed sheets for my project at CSM. So that's how I started, really, because I had no money. It's cheaper and it was there. And the more I was working with limitation, the more I was like, my job as a designer is to find solution. And sometimes I cannot choose the color, I cannot choose the size of the beads that I'm gonna use, but that's exciting because then I have to make it work. And I think that's what I like the most about upcycling in general. And also I'm a Swiss person, I'm from Switzerland. I tend to be very neutral, but I have decided that I don't want to hear any more excuses. Oh, that's not the right color. I don't want to hear any more excuses also about the time, you know, because it is a hard industry we're working in, but I think we just have to make it work with strength and kindness.
Amazing. And Cecile, how about you? Is that something that you also recognize and resonates with you?
I think so, and I think it what's like come to mind from all of us when we start our brands. But I also think that that's also why you want to find your way of doing it and your way of approaching how you can do better. And it's not easy. It's a challenge, but it's you have to take that on as a creative talent and find the best way possible for you. And then I think as a designer anymore, you can't start from a blank canvas. You have to work what you have and improve and learn, and it's those learnings that also makes you better. So yeah.
So I think it's interesting to hear from you, Kevin, and from you, Cecile, that rather than seeing circularity as a restraint, you kind of see it almost as your source of creative inspiration and a challenge to do things differently. Kevin, could you maybe explain a little bit more about how that actually sort of informs your work and how you approach your label?
I am very lucky that I have a family that is very dedicated and that love me very much, because that's something I always find. I have a big issue when it comes when you design sustainable product. For me, it's not enough now. It's not just about that. It's about who is working with you. Is the woman paid as well as the men? Have you traveled to the factories that you are working with to make sure that everyone has a smile on their face? Or are they just smiling because the boss asked them to smile because you're coming to visit it? I work in Shanghai with a factory, and I go there usually 2 to 3 weeks to really see who they are. I know their names, they know my name. And you know, it's very important because, especially and unfortunately because of COVID, when COVID hit us, that's when the people you were kind before, they will give it back to you. When they will have to select if they still want to work with you or with another brand, because you know maybe they have money issues, they will choose you because you were always professional, always kind. And I think that's very important. I always take the example of my grandma, because seems like now I'm using her as a marketing tool, but I am not. It's just for you guys to understand. It was funny because it was at the same time that Lady Gaga wore Germanier to an appearance. I posted Lady Gaga, got the likes on Instagram. That's not very important, but then I posted the picture that a local newspaper from my village in Switzerland. So it's very small. I think it's 5,000 people living there. And my grandma picture got so many likes. And I was like, that's what people want. They want to see who's behind your business. And I started my YouTube channel to really show where I source, because it's nice to say, oh, it's organic cotton. But I feel like it's not enough. People want to see the receipt. They really want to also be part of the story. And I think just that is already sustainable, in the sense that you are creating a contact with your clients, a honest contact, because you cannot fake that my grandma is knitting, like, you know what I mean? Sorry, I don't know if I really understood the question very well, but that's how it works.
Perfect, absolutely perfect. Rosh, I know when we spoke ahead of this panel that you also spoke about the importance of the people involved in the process. I wonder how that kind of informs your work, and if you could talk to us a little bit about that also.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a really personal story. I was in quite a dark place when I started. Well, before I started Alighieri, I was kind of going through a lot of my life and was struggling with depression. And I studied Italian at university, French and Italian, and got obsessed with Dante's story because it was a story of someone, you know, lost in a dark wood. And I loved the idea of creating one piece of jewelry for each one of his poems and celebrating that idea of imperfection. And I think ultimately I was using that as a way to feel less lonely. And So for me now, when I come in and I have my amazing team, and the people who are buying our pieces, it feels very much like a group of people who are coming together to bond over the fact that life is difficult, and we all go through the same challenges, and it's really easy in this industry sometimes to pretend that things are glossy and everyone's kind of living their best life. But I just kind of want to use the brand to be honest about the fact that sometimes things are difficult, and if we're open and honest about that, then we can get together, and kind of that transfers itself to the materials. I mean, I loved Baroque pearls initially because there was a strand of them at our suppliers that cost next to nothing because nobody wanted them because they weren't perfect. They were the offcuts, they were the throwaways. And I loved that. I loved how they were the outsiders. And I think the materials that you use and the people that you meet along the way, all kind of bringing their story to the same place. And ultimately, we're all just imbuing and creating these objects together, imbuing them with this sense of personal adventure, and then they are passed on to the consumer, who can imbue them with their own sense of adventure. And in that sense, it's this really kind of circular story. Sorry, it's a roundabout way to answer your question, but
not at all. Amazing. And Cecile, I was reading about your Encore collection, and I think it said that sort of one of the things you're doing as part of that is giving work to seamstresses during periods that would otherwise be their kind of low season, to ensure that they have consistent work throughout the year. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about that collection.
No, so I think like for us, we launched the Encore project also before the pandemic, but it's really been one of the most beautiful projects for me. It's all based on our archive fabrics, and every scrap of everything I've ever designed I've kept because it's precious to me and it's part of our history. And I think like being able to create these pieces with local seamstresses and kind of put together of like, we did like a dress that had like 5 different season scraps in it, but it actually became nearly more precious than the first piece, and they become one of a kind, and they become collectibles, and it becomes something that you want to cherish and you want to pass on, and you start that circularity and the story that like it should never go on sale, and it should always be something that you want to wear and you want to lend it to your friend. And like, I think it's like, yeah, as you guys are also mentioning, this part of being a community, opening up about how you create and how you use, and that things should be timeless, and it should have a value, and it shouldn't be connected just to a season. And I think that's always been hard for me. And with this project, like it all made sense because I could always bring it back, and it was never out of season for me. And yeah, so I think it's like finding the ways of challenging some of these norms in fashion and then making them your strength.
I think that's really interesting, and you've actually beautifully brought me on to my next question, which was really thinking about that end consumer. What would you encourage people to consider before investing in one of your pieces? I guess sort of what thought process would you like them to go through before making a purchase?
I think like we all know the saying like buy less and buy right. And I think that is like, it is what it is about. Like you should buy it because you love it and you want to wear it, and it's part of you and part of your personality. And then like you want to cherish it. And I think that's why for me, comfort in what I make is so important, because even though it is a nearly couture dress or delicate fabric, it feels like air when you put it on, and it feels nice and it gives you comfort. So I think for me, it always has this element of wearability, and it needs to not be too precious. So yeah.
And Kevin, I know you've sort of talked about the fact that you've almost sort of designed that into your business model, that people do have to think a bit more sort of carefully before they make a purchase from you. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, as a small business, I mean, in the beginning, when we opened our e-com, there's the issue for me that I was afraid that people will just buy it to take a picture for Instagram and then send it back. And for me, this is just the most, how can I put this nicely? Non-smart move to do. Voila, let's just put it that way. And then I have decided, because also I have to pay for the return. So I was like, we will just, it's written on the description of the garment that you want to purchase. It says, we will not pay for the return. So it means that I know some people that are lazy will just be like, oh, I buy it and then I return it. But by knowing that you have to pay for the return, it'll make you think twice. I think it might not work for everyone, but so far we never ever had any returns. So fingers crossed it continues like that. I do understand that if it's a problem of sizing, of course we could have a great conversation about it and there's no issues. But I really want, it's hard, is what Cecile said. We can tell them buy less, buy smart, and you know, but I really struggle to find a way to tell to the people to buy less. But I think it's just by creating unique pieces, then people will really, they will invest in that piece because it's so unique, so different. It's a hard question that you're asking, not gonna lie.
I'm challenging you guys today. And Rosh, you know, the emotional resonance of jewelry was something that inspired you to create Alighieri. How is that sort of playing into sort of your end consumer who's perhaps purchasing one of your pieces because of the emotional longevity that it represents, as well as the quality?
You know what, I think that's exactly what I love about doing Alighieri, is that somehow I feel really lucky to have amazing customers who are really sentimental, and because each of our pieces has a story and comes with a postcard which, you know, tells you the story of the brand, and it's often something very personal or about, you know, finding courage or finding light in the midst of darkness. They actually tell us why they're buying it, and we've had so many stories. I mean, the Leone Medallion, apologies, I have tonsillitis, so my voice is a bit grim. The Leone Medallion is all about, it's kind of our signature piece, all about, you know, finding courage at the moments where you feel at your lowest. And we've had, you know, women and men write to us and say, you know, I'm struggling with cancer and I'm buying this to give myself a piece of courage. Or we had this amazing customer who bought a Leone Medallion, and she emailed us the next day and said, one of my friends just had a breakup yesterday, so I took my Leone Medallion off and I gave it to her because she needed courage more than I did, and can I have another one? And I think for me it's all about that. It's about that story, and it's about the genuine story. And I think that the more people relate to something emotionally, the longer that the fact it becomes part of them. And I think in some ways jewelry is inherently that, and that's kind of what I want to use Alighieri for, to remind people that, you know, jewelry shouldn't be trend-based. It shouldn't be throwaway. It's been a forever concept amongst all different cultures since the beginning of time. So in that sense, I'm lucky that there's inherently that respect for something like that, because we know that we should pass on our jewelry from generation to generation.
And that's interesting. You sort of touch on the role of educating consumers. Obviously, the circular economy and sort of certain aspects of sustainability aren't necessarily that well known to consumers. But how can creativity help to raise awareness? And indeed, do you see educating people of sustainability as part of your role as a designer? Kevin, I know when we spoke that you felt like it wasn't your role to educate, and you had good reasons for that. So maybe you can talk about that one.
Yeah, I was hoping you will choose someone else, because my my answers are a little bit harsh on that, because I cannot imagine myself conceiving a product in a non-sustainable way. My job is, I'm a designer. I'm not an activist. I am not a teacher. I will not give you a moral. My goal is to create a beautiful product that people hopefully will like and then will want to learn more about it. I never ever used sustainable, upcycling, dead stock, you know, all those words. And it's funny because I was literally just before we are talking now, before I was in a talk for Fashion Revolution France. And I said that all those words for me, someone said it was a trend, and I just lose my marbles, because I was like, since when saving the planet is a trend? Sustainability is not a trend. It just should be the normal way of creating products. So I'm not very Swiss and neutral on that. I'm very harsh, because it feels like everything is sustainable nowadays. Your pizza is sustainable. The glass you're drinking it is sustainable. The furniture is sustainable. So I think instead of just bragging about it, show us why is it sustainable, or tell us your story, because I am interested more in that, in your story as an individual. Like if you just tell me it's organic cotton, I'm not impressed anymore. Is the woman paid, the one that you are hiring? How many hours is she working? You know, it's all of those layers that I feel like, and Sally, correct me if I'm wrong, you said something yesterday very nice. Us, obviously, we know about it because we are working around that. But I take the example of my dad, who works for the Swiss Army. So, you know, completely different background. And he asked me, how are your beads sustainable? And that's when I was like, okay, you have to find an easy way to that customer, you know, the customer that is curious, but I don't want to like write a long summary. I think what you're doing, Rush, is actually really nice. A super nice postcard. I haven't seen it, so correct me if I'm wrong, but just, you don't have to do much. You just have to communicate in a very nice way that is genuine.
I think that you're right. And I think you've kind of hit on something that's quite interesting, in that a lot of, you know, much bigger companies and brands are using these terms as a pure kind of marketing tool. And I think that that's where it starts to kind of lose its value a little bit. And I think that you're really right, Kevin. What does it mean to be sustainable? It's not just a word that you can put on, you know, in your Google AdWords to make yourself appear a little bit higher or appear in certain kind of magazines. It's about, do you actually care? And I think it's just kindness and caring, right? And of course, it's easier to do when you're small. And I appreciate that it's harder to do if you are a company that is 2,000 people and you started in the 90s, where, you know, people didn't really care as much. But what I would say is, I think that it's the job of the bigger businesses in this industry to, you know, not just use these terms as a way of marketing themselves, and actually like care a little bit more, like genuinely care, which is a big ask, I guess. But that's kind of my dream for it.
Yeah.
Yes, Cecile, how about you? What's your reaction to what you've heard from Rosh and Kevin?
No, but I think like what we're all kind of saying is that it's also not an easy task. You have to take your own take on what sustainability is for you, and where can you be responsible, and where can you make a difference. And then I think it's new for fashion to open up and to let people in and to be vulnerable. Like you always had to be strong and to have the answer, and I think that's the new thing, and to tell the processes and tell how you work. And I think for me, the way I design and way I work is quite traditional, but like actually having Instagram, having like we work also with blockchain technology, having these things that makes you able to tell your story and makes you able to open up. It now suddenly doesn't just become about the show, it becomes about the everyday, it becomes about the process, the people you work with, and it actually adds more value also to your day. And I think that's the beauty of it. And I think that's luckily what you find, that even though it's such a challenging process, and you keep, the more you want to do, the more hurdles you also have to get over somehow. And then that you then also get these kind of beautiful moments in it where it all like makes sense. I think it's that balance, and it's that story that is interesting to tell, at least for me.
Do you know what? It reminds me so much of at our caster, because we cast everything in Hatton Garden, which is just around the corner from our studio. And I was in a flea market. This was pre-pandemic, when we could go to flea markets. And I found this amazing military flask that was the shape of a teardrop. And I was like, this is incredible. I wonder if we can kind of use this as inspiration to create something for Alighieri. And I took it to our casters, and there's a guy there who's in his late 80s called David, and he looked at it and he said, I made that. I made that. And I was like, no. I was like, how can we create a hinge like this, David? He's like, I made that. And I was just like, that to me is like everything. Like that person made that object, and just remembering that for a minute. And I think maybe the challenge is just to slow down, because if you slow down a little bit, that's when you hear the stories, and that's when you start to kind of go to that creative place and explore new ways of doing things. think part of the biggest challenge in the industry, I think, is just the pace. I think because it's so fast, then it forces you to make not bad decisions, but, you know, because there's this desire for like new all the time, that it doesn't give you that moment necessarily. And I think that's our job. For me, I think that's my job, to just slow down and remember that there's, you know, there's another way of doing it, and that way is often the more enjoyable way, and you get to hear the David story, you know.
Yeah. You've all talked about themes of sort of openness, both about your own process and also having that opportunity kind of to explore and to discover and to continue that kind of learning journey. What role do you see partnerships and collaborations in taking new approaches to circularity? I know you've all kind of had various opportunities to collaborate, and I wonder if we can talk a little bit more about that. Kevin, maybe I can start with you. You were telling me about the amazing jewellery that you created and the collaboration that you'd had there.
Yeah, I can take our jewelry work, or we also work with Christian Louboutin. We have an upcoming LVMH collaboration coming soon. And I always say, for me, collaboration is the key. Why should I do something spend time doing something that someone else is doing better and has the knowledge? And it's not, for me, it's never a question about money, because of course, if you do it yourself, maybe when you sell the product, then you make all the profit, great. But the point of a collaboration is also but sharing ideas. And I always find myself collaborating with people that not necessarily has the same DNA as me. Swarovski, of course, is the same DNA, so it's super easy to work with. But I did work with people that I was like, they want to collaborate with us, but why? And that's when magic comes, because it's so unexpected. And yeah, I really enjoy collaboration. A little bit about our jewelry, I could say, is that we work with Rousset, who is a 3D printer jewelry maker, and he's using my God, I don't know the name in English. It's a plastic made out of corn, so you can 3D print it. And it was actually a collaboration with Swarovski, so it was a collaboration of a collaboration. So I just think when people get together, that's when magics happen. I will take, once again, I will talk about my grandma, I know, bless her. But for me, every time I work with my grandma, it's almost a collaboration, because bear in mind that she's 82. I cannot ask her to make something too difficult or just a stitch that is too time consuming, because I know I want her to enjoy working with me. I don't want her to be like, oh, I have to do that for Kevin. And recently she told me, and I have the goosebumps, she said to me, I need to translate from French. You are giving me a second life at 82. And for me, I have the tears in my eyes, because it's just like, if I can do that by collaborating with her, for me, my job here is done. And I think it's just genuine. It's that what we're all of us trying to say, Roche and Cecile. You cannot fake something so genuine. And I feel like the customer now is smart enough to realize that. Like, one last thing that I'm very annoyed today, because it's Earth Day. We're having this chat all together, but some brands are using Earth Day as once again, marketing tool. Hey, we made an amazing upcycle collection just for Earth Day. For me, it's so hypocrite, because they just want to make money out of today. So kind of missing the point.
But I think that's a very good point. And how about you, Cecile? I read that you have a long-term collaboration with Macintosh, and I'm sure other means of collaboration. Maybe you can talk about how that's kind of evolved and informed your work.
Like, I think, like, when I look at a collaboration, of course, like this, the same as Kevin, it's like, it's you need to learn from the people you work with, but it's also, I see it as friendship collaborations. Like, we share a craft, we share love for longevity. And like, working with Macintosh for me is like the perfect like match, like the way they make the jackets, like the touch of the hand, and then the utilitarian, the way that it's a raincoat. You can wear it with the dress and you can protect your dress so that it lasts longer. But then on top of that, I think it's important for me that a collaboration is not a trend, that I see it as something permanently part of my collection. So I will work with Macintosh next season and the season after. It's not just this hit to have something to talk about on Instagram, but it's to be part of the brand, and to grow together. I think that's when it makes sense for me.
Absolutely. And Rosh, we first had the pleasure of meeting you this spring when we worked with you on the Hyundai Restyle project. Obviously quite an unexpected collaboration in the automotive industry and fashion and jewellery. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about that and sort of what you learned through the process.
For sure. I mean, I absolutely loved that partnership. So Hyundai sent us a box through spring of all of the parts of their car that they couldn't recycle, and this box arrived of seatbelt and, you know, shards of glass from headlights and stuff that you'd be like, I think my boyfriend actually opened it and he was like, what are you gonna do with this? And it was this moment of like, okay, what are we gonna do with it? And it really forced us to go to a different place in our heads. So we kind of created these chokers with all of this kind of these excess pearls that we had in our studio, and this idea of two completely different worlds coming together was quite amazing. And we actually created this story of like, when I was little, I grew up in Africa, and as a baby I couldn't sleep very well, and the only thing apparently that would put me to bed was my dad putting me in the car and taking me for a drive. And the idea of being in the car felt like this safe place. And I think jewelry is a bit like that. You know, sometimes people often say like, oh, I forgot to put my ring on and I just don't feel like myself, or I feel like I'm missing a part of me. And that idea of using talismans to protect you and finding synergies between people from different realms and cultures, I think is what a collaboration is. And I think that the world can sometimes feel very divisive, and to go back to the loneliness thing, and I think something that's been very heightened during the pandemic, that, you know, ultimately we're all just these kind of, we're all individuals trying to make our way, and the more we can learn from each other and grow together, the less alone we feel. And that's kind of, for me, the pursuit of life. And not to get too philosophical about it, but yeah, it was really magical. And also it was magical because it was quite scary in the beginning to think, how are we going to turn seatbelts into something that feels really luxurious, or, you know, pieces of glass or the foam from inside a car seat. So it's challenging and it's fun. And I think, Cecile, what you said about friendship is exactly that.
What do you guys look for when it comes to doing sort of a partnership or collaboration, and how important is it to be choiceful? I think, Kevin, you mentioned it. There is the danger of people sort of exploiting your passion for sustainability for commercial gain. How do you make sure that the collaboration is going to be mutually beneficial and have the end effect that you guys want as well?
Sometimes it's quite easy because it's just a feeling. You kind of know, you read the contract and you know when after the few lines when he say, okay, the money will be divided like this, you know that for me, I'm not interested in that. That's not the point. And I really, really enjoy what you said, Cecile, that I want to find someone. It's just, if it works, why not do it again? And to be honest, Swarovski, we've been working with them for 7th season. We also have sometimes collaboration with buyers, with stores. A good example is Matches. We always doing collaboration with them. We also, with Rousset, for example, we're already thinking what can we do for next season. So just honesty, I would say, and don't just sign straight after one meeting. Like, take the time to know each other. What do you want to get out of it also? But most of the time it's quite easy to find someone that can just that you know you will click with. It's quite a spontaneous process, I have to say. Usually you can, as a good CEO, you must know what are people's intention.
Absolutely. And Cecile, what's the biggest thing you've learned through collaboration? Has anything surprised you that you've learned through the process of partnering with somebody?
I think as Kevin says, for me, it's always a stomach feeling, and I don't think that I can, I think it's always based on that, and that's when you start a brand of your own and you grow from really small and then slowly get you have to follow that feeling, and that's when you know you have your gut feeling. That's like it's an annoying answer, but for me, I think that's really for collaborations. They for me need to feel right, and they sometimes like might sound odd to others, but like for me, if we build on the same like love for craft and longevity, and we can contrast and challenge each other, then I think that's what's key to me. Yeah.
And it's something we've sort of circled around, but obviously as individual designers, you're able to embrace circularity in your own work and your approach. But what do you think the fashion industry as a whole needs to do? And do you have a point of view about what would make the biggest change? Big question. Who wants to go first?
You're scared to say my name, right?
No, but I think collaboration on that note is what needs to happen and what is happening today, like talking and sharing experiences, and not like, I know Kevin from before, like not being scared to ask, like, how did you actually do this? And have you ran into this trouble? And like opening up and letting in, I think that's like, it goes a little bit sometimes against how we are maybe educated, but I think that is what we need to do, big and small, because we are all learning. Yeah.
Yeah, and also maybe just, I think it's really easy as a small brand to be like, oh, we're gonna just change that, because we can be more flexible, because obviously we're like 25, 30 people, which is still quite big, to be honest, but we're not talking about, I used to be a junior designer at Louis Vuitton, so different size of business, and I arrived there when it was the time when they switched the plastic cups for the paper cups, and it took them 1 month just to change it, and I was like, but it's just, they just have to come to the office and change it. And then my boss, the one who was in charge of my internship, she told me that bear in mind that they don't have to change it only here. They will change it to the factory in Florence. They will change it also to the crocodile leather factory that is somewhere else. So, you know, I think people think it's so easy to be like, oh, you're a bad person, you're using that, but you need time. And I feel like sometimes we are a little bit impatient. So I'm not defending them. I'm just trying to explain also the other side of the table, that it takes really a lot of time because it has not been built the right way. Hopefully we are trying to build it already from the start the right way, so it could be easier for us to adapt.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think for me, the enemy is kind of, it's guilt, actually, which I think can be quite paralyzing. Sometimes it's easy to think, well, like, you know, we could be doing so much more, and you feel guilty because you feel like you're not doing enough for the planet. And I mean, I think actually that's the thing that paralyzes, for me anyway, that's the thing that paralyzes me. I think that just being like, you know, there's no such thing as being perfect, and it's impossible for any of us to live, you know, completely 100% sustainably in this industry, or, you know, even if you live in a city, it's impossible. So it's about, you know, doing what you can, being kind about it, choosing your battles, and waking up and just doing the best you can with what you have. And I think that's the way forward. If everyone does that, then we naively kind of hope that we can, you know, make a difference.
That's a very nice positive comment to bring it to a close on. I've got time, I think, for just probably one question from our attendees. Giovanna says, hello everyone. Do you think there's a difference among people, countries, cultures in perceiving of sustainable messages? Are any more receptive than others? I think that's interesting. A lot of you have a global remit. So are there any specific regions or generations that you feel are kind of more connecting with this sustainable message than others?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Because I work, one of my factories in Shanghai, and what I'm trying to do also with Germany is to show that the made in China from 2021 is not the made in China that we used to say, because it was synonym of bad quality. And when I went there and I asked them in the very beginning at Germany, we were using leftover denim, or we were buying vintage denim to do our denim, and they were like, in the factory, they were like, but why not making a new one? And because for them, I remember she told me that she believed that if you buy the garment from a vintage store, the ghost of that person will haunt you. So, you know, there's so many layers, and I'm sure I'm not explaining the story as well as she would, but it's just to summarize that I'm sure in any part of the world, there's so many different cultures, rich cultures and stories that we don't know. So I'm always so willing to learn more about it. But sometimes I also know that, for example, there's a customer in Dubai. She's lovely, but she told me in the beginning, to be honest, I did not know it was sustainable and I did not care because I liked the product. I really enjoy her honesty. And now every time she's asking, oh, can you tell me where does it come from? It might not be a lot of people, but at least this woman from Dubai is willing to learn more because of our product. And I think it's really lovely it's a lovely story. So yes, I think there is definitely different stories.
Cecile, Roche, anything to add to that?
I think I'll go on, Cecile,
Oh,
sorry.
no, you go.
I was just going to say, I think generationally, what's really lovely is to see that the next generation, it's a non-negotiable. And I see that a lot with the amazing people on our team. And I learned so much from them because, you know, when I was at school, it's good to recycle, like recycle if you can. And what they're learning in school and what they have learned is that it's so much more than that. And it's become this kind of hard stop non-negotiable. Like, what are we doing with our packaging? Like, is that necessary? And that's really lovely to see that progress. So I think from a generational point of view, it's really nice to see that the generations that are coming next are incredibly passionate about it. And it's not an add-on, it's a must-have.
And Cecile, to come to you.
You took me exactly on the point, but I think like it is the expectations are there, and I think it should just feel natural. And I really hope that in a time we won't have to say it. Like, it's just that a beautiful design shouldn't shout that it's sustainable. It's just is conscious and about the longevity of it. And like, I think that's for me, like the design and the beauty has to be like it's not activism, it's like it's just natural, I think.
What a positive and lovely note to leave it on. I'm afraid that is all we have time for, but thank you very much indeed to our amazing panelists for not only your time, but your passion and your insight. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you do have any questions about today's panel, do get in touch with us. And if you want to watch it back or share it with any friends or colleagues, a recording of this panel will be available shortly. So all that remains is for me to wish you a happy Earth Day from all of us and all of us at Spring. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.